Welcome to part 10 of this series, which is a deep dive into end times prophecies. I'm Jennifer Miller, and we are toward the end of Revelation. We only have two more lessons after this, and I'm so excited that we are really getting into the meat of the events that lead up to Jesus's second coming. And I just want to remind everybody about the purpose of this study. It is so that one, we are awake and ready, just as Jesus commanded us, just as Paul reiterated it, just as the book of Revelation calls us to be. We are supposed to be awake, ready, so that we're not led astray, we're not deceived, but also so that we have our wedding garments on, that they are clean, that they have not been dirtied. And if you remember, the wedding garments are the righteous deeds of the saints. So we need to also then be on mission. We need to be doing the work of the church. We need to be his hands and his feet. We need to be speaking out the gospel, speaking out our testimony. We also need to help those who proclaim to be Christians, who are asleep, who don't know better about the things that are coming and what they should be doing, and speaking truth over them as well. We want all the virgins to have enough oil to make it through the night, not just the remnant. And so if we can make that group as large as possible, I know that that will please the Father's heart. You know, the Lord said in Matthew 24 that it'll be like the days of Noah. And I think that there are multiple facets to that statement. But one of them that was highlighted to me this week is that, in the days of Noah, he built an ark and his family went onto the ark, and God closed the door right before disaster came. Well, the church is the new ark, and we are a family, and we're all on the ark, but we're supposed to be trying to get as many people into the family and onto the ark as possible, because there will come a point where God will shut the door and disaster is going to come. And in fact, that's going to be the focus of our lesson today. Is we're going to be talking about the seven bowls, or some translations call them vials, but this is now God's wrath. What we've talked about before is Satan's wrath, right? The great tribulation is Satan's wrath being poured out. He is making war on the saints, and he is allowed to prevail for a time. That's going to be what we talked about last time, with the false prophet rising up to help lead many astray, to encourage and entice people to worship the image of the beast, but also to take the mark of the beast, which we know condemns them to judgment. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So this is something that can really feel dark and ominous, but remember, we're on the ark. We are already secure, but that doesn't mean that our heart doesn't break and that we are not concerned about those who are not on the ark, those who are going to be subject to the coming destruction. Another way to put it that the Lord gave me was, imagine being a little kid, right? And you have a wonderful father, and he goes on a long trip, and you are so excited about him coming back because he's coming back for you. He's coming back to bless you. This is something you're looking forward to. Now, imagine how different that would be if you were in trouble. And you know that he was coming back to punish you, that you know that he was coming back to spank you, or to bring about some kind of punishment that you would find dreadful, right? So then, instead of his return, his imminent return, being something you're happy about, that you're celebrating, that you're excited about, instead you would be scared. You would be dreading it. You would be afraid, okay? And so we know that we are not subject to his wrath. Jesus already took the punishment for us. So we're in the first camp, right? We're the ones who get to be excited, to be happy that he's coming back for us. But we do have people close to us. Imagine what it would be like if you were excited that dad was coming home for you, but then you knew that your sibling was going to be the one being punished. So you would have mixed emotions, because you'd be excited for yourself, but you would be sad, if not even afraid, on behalf of your sibling, because you know what they're going to be facing when dad gets home. And that's what today's lesson may feel like. You can be both excited about the fact that we are spared from his wrath, that we are not subject to God's wrath, that Jesus already took that upon himself for us, while at the same time reading and learning about what's to come for those who reject Christ and instead align themselves with the Antichrist, who worship the Antichrist, worship the beast, right? And take his mark. We can be sad, we can be concerned, but don't let that be something that, one, you're taking upon yourself, because you can still be encouraged and excited for yourself while you are also praying for those around you, but also let that be a motivation. How do we get more on the ark? We know what's coming. Don't be paralyzed, by that fear or by that sadness or by that dread for them on their behalf. Okay. Like this is an opportunity to be helping them know, hey, you can get out of the punishment, right? You can get off of the bad list, right? Like you can be with me over here where that's already been squared away, that's already been accounted for, and we can now just celebrate the coming of Christ. So as we go into today's lesson, let not your heart be troubled, okay? Jesus has already overcome the world for us. Those of us that are in him, we are spared from this wrath. But at the same time, it's understandable if there's a heaviness, if there's a sadness, if there's a grief or even a fear on the behalf of those who will be facing these things. Okay? All right. So, with all that being said, we're going to be jumping into the scripture talking about the seven bowls of God's wrath. So, starting in Revelation 15, verse 1, then I saw another sign in heaven, great and amazing, seven angels with seven plagues, which are the last, for with them the wrath of God is finished. Okay, so a couple things I want to point out. This is very reminiscent of when we studied Revelation 12, when John started out by saying there was a sign in heaven and it was the woman about to give birth. There was a sign in heaven and it was the dragon coming that was over ready to attack when the woman gave birth. And I shared in our previous lesson how those were actually descriptors of constellations and events that actually happened amongst the stars in the visible sky. And then he went and elaborated upon what was happening behind the scenes in the unseen realm. And I believe that this is also making a reference to another sign in heaven. We don't see that very often in the book of Revelation. And so far in Revelation 12, the sign in heaven that was the woman is the constellation Virgo, and the sign in the heaven that was the dragon was the constellation Hydra. And so when I was studying this, I said, okay, it's another sign in heaven, but this time it's seven angels. And there's a constellation that is known as the Seven Sisters, and it's called the Pleiades. Okay. And I believe there's something significant with John pointing out that right before the bowls of wrath, right before God's wrath is poured out, there's a sign in heaven. And I think it's meant to help us to recognize when things are about to happen. So this is a picture of Pleiades. Okay. Now there's other stars, but the brightest, there are seven that are the brightest. It's also right next to Venus, so that's also bright. So some people might get confused and think Venus is a part of the constellation. But this is the Pleiades, okay? Like I said, it's known as the Seven Sisters. And what's interesting about this is that in the end times, not in end times, in ancient times, there we go, here. In ancient times, they would use the Pleiades to help them plan for their crops. So the Pleiades would be in one position in the sky in the spring, and they would use that as a marker about when to plant. Then the Pleiades, I believe, almost kind of disappears in the summer because it's too close to the sun, if I'm remembering my study correctly. But the key piece is what happens in the fall when it's time for harvest, okay? And remember what Jesus said about the fig tree. He said that when the fig tree comes into leaf, that is a sign that summer's coming. Okay. And so the fig tree coming to leaf, that comes in the spring. That's when things start to bloom and blossom. And then the fruit ripen in the summer. And then they are ready for harvest in the fall. So I think there's an intentionality here about connecting the Pleiades with the very last of things right before Jesus comes. And in fact, I think that the rise of the Pleiades as the sign in heaven is actually a sign of Jesus's second coming, and the rapture, which we're going to read here in a moment, in Revelation 14 is called a reaping. It's the harvest, but there's two things that are going to be harvested, and the first is going to be the church. That's what we refer to as the rapture, because remember, it comes from harpazo. Harpazo means to be caught up. And so that's what I believe John is saying here. So let me share just a little bit more about that. So, as I was just saying, that Matthew 24 reference about the fig tree, but also what I was sharing about them using the Pleiades to guide them. The other thing is that the evening rising of Pleiades happens in autumn. And like I said, that corresponds to the fruit being ripened enough to harvest. That usually happens in September. Now, what also happens typically in September is the Feast of Trumpets, which is known as Rosh Hashanah. And that feast is a foreshadowing of the final trumpet and the coming of Christ. So Rosh Hashanah is considered the day in which, or the time in which, a person's name is either written into the book of life or into the book of death for the coming year. Now, for most people, the observant Jews to this feast, especially currently, is that your name is not necessarily written on that day, but Rosh Hashanah starts a 10-day period of repentance, which culminates in Yom Kippur. And Yom Kippur is the Day of Atonement. And that's when, yes, your fate is sealed for the year. And so observant Jews, religious Jews, still to this day, every year spend those 10 days begging God to put their name into the book of life for another year. Whereas we as Christians, we know our name is written permanently in the book of life. It's written, in the Jesus's blood, right? So we know that. Now the question becomes, the correlation between that and the final trumpet. And I believe that's significant. I believe that that's intentional. So the question is the sign in heaven of the seven angels represent the Pleiades rising, indicating the figs are ripe for harvest, and it's time to blow the final trumpet. It's time for Jesus to come and reap, right? His church, rapture his church, take in that harvest, drawing it, gathering it to himself. So I believe so. Now, whether that means literally Jesus is going to come back in the month of September at some point, I don't know. This may instead all just be, kind of symbolic. But, of course, at some point we will see it all play out in reality, and we'll be able to confirm some of these hypotheses that we have. So continuing on in Revelation 15. Then it says, John, and I saw what appeared to be a sea of glass mingled with fire. And that's not the first time we've seen him describe that. Back in Revelation 4, verse 6, he said, and before the throne, there was, as it were, a sea of glass like crystal. So this is just letting us know that we're now in the throne, we're before the throne. And then he says, and also those who had conquered the beast and its image and the number of its name, standing beside the sea of glass with harps of God in their hands. We saw this already as well in Revelation 7, talking about the great multitude. After this, I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes. These are the ones coming out of the great tribulation. Well, what's the great tribulation? That's the beast rising to power, putting out the mark of the beast, requiring its worship, all of that. So this just corresponds. We are now in the throne room. The great multitude is there. All of that has now reached its culmination. Okay. And they sing, the great multitude sing the song of Moses, the servant of God, and the song of the Lamb, saying, great and amazing are your deeds, O Lord God the Almighty. Just and true are your ways, O King of the nations. Who will not fear, O Lord, and glorify your name? For you alone are holy. All nations will come and worship you, for your righteous acts have been revealed. After this, I looked, and the sanctuary of the tent of witness in heaven was opened. Sanctuary can also be translated to temple, and tent can also be translated to tabernacle. Okay. And this corresponds to something we read back in Revelation 11, that at the seventh trumpet, it says, then God's temple in heaven was opened, and the ark of his covenant was seen within his temple. Okay, so we've seen this before. So we're just, all these threads, all these different series of events are all culminating and lining up to this one moment. And so I'm just showing you that this all, it's been said before already. Okay, so just kind of helping to orient us to where we are. We're in the throne room. Okay, and what's happening, this is the point when the sky is going to be rolled up. That's the sixth seal, right? The sky is going to be rolled up, and everything's going to become visible. And but knowing that this is also the moment, okay, that the angels are going to be given the bowls of God's wrath. Okay. And it goes on, and out of the sanctuary, or the temple, came the seven angels with the seven plagues, clothed in pure bright linen with golden sashes around their chests. And one of the four living creatures gave to the seven angels seven golden bowls full of the wrath of God who lives forever and ever. And the sanctuary was filled with the smoke from the glory of God and from his power, and no one could enter the sanctuary until the seven plagues of the seven angels were finished. Okay, so this is a very significant event, what's happening. Now, as far as the timing, this is right before Jesus comes. Jesus may even be coming in the midst of this, as you'll see. But also, there's signs that this could be happening all within one day. Like, so I'll point that out when we get there. But, this could all be happening in one day, or at least in a relatively short period of time, what's going to transpire here. So the question then becomes, is where are we? Where's the remnant? Where are the true believers? Where's the church when all of this is happening, when the seven bowls of wrath are being poured out? Okay. Now, first of all, they're being poured out, as we will see, on those who took the mark of the beast and worshiped its image. Okay. So these bowls of wrath are specifically judgment for those who aligned themselves with the beast kingdom, who followed the Antichrist and the false prophet, who engaged in this worship of the beast, which we will see later is considered sexual immorality in a spiritual sense because it's spiritual adultery. The true bride of Christ, right? We were supposed to reserve ourselves for him alone. In a sense, we're supposed to be virginal, right? We're not supposed to be in bed with Jezebel. We're not supposed to be committing spiritual adultery with other gods, including this Antichrist figure, right? Okay, so with all that being said, then where are we? If we're not subject to the bowls of wrath, those of us who stay loyal and don't take the mark, where are we? So it's unclear in that statement I was just sharing, those verses I was just sharing about the throne room, if that's only the great multitude who are martyred in the great tribulation and they're waiting to come back with Jesus so that they then get their resurrected bodies, right? The dead shall rise first. And then those of us who are alive are caught up into the air, harpazo, raptured into the air to join them. And we're transformed in the process, in the twinkling of an eye, as we are caught up into the clouds. So is this in that moment where the great multitude is gathered? Okay, they have fully come in, all those, the fullness of the Gentile come in, the fullness of the martyrs has come in. It is now time to go. Or if that scene actually does represent the raptured church. Okay, it could represent the raptured church because even those who aren't martyred but who stay loyal to the Lord and don't take the mark of the beast, we could also say they also overcame it because they didn't take the mark. So when we see that verse that says that those who are in the throne room are those who own it, that could just be the martyrs, or it could be the whole church, those who are all faithful, those who all overcame them. Um, I tend to go for option A, and I'll show you why. But I think that's the gratitude ready and gathered to come back with Jesus to then call us to him. Okay, so that's the one I tend to lean toward once you kind of take everything into account. Okay. But like I said, we know we are not subject to God's wrath. There are multiple verses we've already covered in other lessons that reiterate that. Romans 5:9. Since therefore we have now been justified by his blood, much more shall we be saved by him from the wrath of God. 1 Thessalonians 5:9. For God has not destined us for wrath, but to obtain salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ. And Ephesians 5:6, let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these things, the wrath of God comes upon who? The sons of disobedience. Okay, not the children of God, not the sons of God. God's wrath is going to come upon the sons of disobedience. Okay. So, as I've already mentioned, I'm going to now take us back real quickly to a passage in Revelation 14 because I believe that the great multitude is ready. They're going to come back with Jesus on the clouds. They're going to be resurrected first, and then here's the first reaping. The first, because there's going to be two reapings, and think about what reaping means. Reaping means that you are harvesting, right, the crop, that you are gathering in the crop. There's going to be two reapings, two different groups gathered. Okay. And they're different people and they're gathered for different things. And the first gathering is the gathering of the church, which we often refer to as the rapture. So let me share that first. So starting in verse 14, then I looked and behold a white cloud, and seated on the cloud, one like a son of man, with a golden crown on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. And another angel came out of the temple, calling with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, put in your sickle and reap. For the hour to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is fully ripe. So he who sat on the cloud swung his sickle across the earth, and the earth was reaped. Okay, so who's the one that's coming back on a cloud? Who is going to gather his elect from the four corners of the earth and gather them up to himself in the clouds? Jesus. Okay, who has John already referred to as one like a son of man, one with a golden crown on his head? Okay, like this is Jesus. Okay, so he's the one who is doing the first reaping because he is gathering, harpazo, rapturing, okay, his church to himself. So we're a part of the first reaping. We're being gathered. Okay. Now look at who the second group is that is being reaped or gathered. Then another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. And another angel came out from the altar, the angel who has authority over the fire. And he called with a loud voice to the one who had the sharp sickle, put in your sickle and gather the clusters from the vine of the earth, for its grapes are ripe. So the angel swung his sickle across the earth and gathered the grape harvest of the earth and threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden outside the city, and blood flowed from the winepress as high as a horse's bridle for 1,600 stadia. So this second reaping, this is not Jesus, right? It's an angel, and another angel who has authority over the fire, right, tells him it's time. But what's being reaped here? It is grapes on the vine of the earth. We are branches on the vine that is Christ. Okay. They are grapes on the vine of the earth. Okay. And they're being gathered together, and they are being put into what is called the great wine press of the wrath of God. We actually will see this idea of the wine press as well as the wine of God's wrath multiple times, okay, throughout Revelation. And this is something we need to be aware of because that is God's wrath, that is his judgment, but it is not final judgment day. That happens later. What this is a specific judgment of the people who put their branch in the vine of the earth, who chose to worship the Antichrist, who took the mark of the beast and worshiped its image. That is who is being reaped here, and they are specifically being gathered for the bowls of wrath because that is their judgment. That is the great wine press of the wrath of God. Okay. And there's a warning also in chapter 14. So if we were to back up, okay, and it says, another angel, a third, followed them, saying with a loud voice, if anyone who worships the beast in its image and receives a mark on his forehead or on his hand, he also will drink the wine of God's wrath, poured full strength into the cup of his anger, and he'll be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. Okay, so that's who's being reaped, is this group. And what they're being gathered for is a very specific judgment. This is not final judgment day. This is not a judgment of everybody. This is a gathering and a judgment of this group. And next time I'm going to do a whole lesson on Armageddon, but I want to give you a preview here of Revelation 19:15, which is Armageddon. And this is Jesus. For his mouth, from his mouth comes a sharp sword. We already saw that that was described as Jesus at the beginning of Revelation. Okay. Now he's coming for this group. Okay. He's coming for this group as a warrior king, and he has a sharp sword. And he's ready to strike down the nations. Okay. And it says, he will tread the winepress of the fury of the wrath of God the Almighty. Okay. So we have those who are reaped for the winepress. And we know, I just read it, it's everybody who worshiped the beast. They're gathered together. Okay. The 6 bowls of wrath are going to be poured out on them. Well, the 7th bowl is Jesus coming back for Armageddon. He's the one who does the final kind of twist on that wine press, and in order to culminate, as it said at the beginning of Revelation 15, that with these bowls, God's wrath is finished. Okay. There's also a prophecy of this in Isaiah 63, verses 1 through 3. Actually, it goes a little bit longer, but I'm just going to read the first three verses to you because you'll get the point. Who is this who comes from Edom in crimson garments from Basra? He who is splendid in his apparel, marching in the greatness of his strength. It is I, speaking in righteousness, mighty to save. Well, who's that? That's Jesus. So then Jesus is asked, why is your apparel red and your garments like his who treads in the winepress? And Jesus says, I have trodden the winepress alone, and from the peoples no one was with me. I trod them in my anger and trampled them in my wrath. So what's making his garments red? Their lifeblood spattered on my garments and stained all my apparel. Okay, so this is the wine press. It is them being judged and killed for that spiritual adultery, for worshiping the beast and rejecting Christ. So again, what that's who the second group is being reaped. We're already gone. We're in the first reaping. Okay. So I think that scene in the throne room, like I said, is the great multitude. They're ready because we know they come back with Jesus, right? And it said, the one who's coming back on a cloud, okay, who unlike a son of man, who's wearing a crown and he gathers the harvest. That's Jesus, and he's rapturing now the church that's still alive on the earth. We are caught up into the air with him, okay? So that's the first reaping. Well, then after we're gathered up, then those who took the mark of the beast and worshiped its image are also reaped and gathered together. Now, I don't know if they are going to gather themselves. We'll read that more next time when we talk about Armageddon, or if there is a supernatural gathering in that whoever from around the world does this, they just find themselves all of a sudden in this place because they're about to have the bowls of God's wrath poured out upon them. And all of that culminates in Jesus's return at Armageddon. And that's where we see that wine press, the final treading of the wine press, which is done by Jesus. Jesus, we see it in Revelation 19:15. We see it prophesied in Isaiah 63. Okay, so we know one, who is subject to the wine press, who is subject to the wine that is God's wrath, but also who is going to be doing it, who's going to be the one treading on that and what that looks like. Okay, so as I've already said, that's the final bowl, but let's look at what all the other bowls are leading up to that moment. And one thing I want to point out too, Moses was a messianic figure, and the redemption that he brought Israel back in the Exodus story, right, where he freed them from literal slavery and he brought them out from that and he led them to the promised land. All of that was a foreshadow of what Jesus is doing. Okay. He has led us out of spiritual slavery and he has led us to a new true promised land. Okay. So, what's interesting is that five, I believe it's five of the bowls correspond to five of the plagues that Moses did in the Exodus story. So I think that that's an interesting correlation because there's a clear correlation between Moses and Jesus. Also, Moses and the Passover and how that foreshadowed Jesus and the cross at Calvary and how that Jesus fulfilled that. So also there's that connection there too. But let's go ahead and read through what the different bowls of wrath are. So this we're going to be reading from Revelation 16. Then I heard a loud voice from the temple telling the seven angels, go and pour out on the earth the seven bowls of the wrath of God. So the first angel went and poured out his bowl on the earth, and harmful and painful sores came upon the people who bore the mark of the beast and worshipped its image. The second angel poured out his bowl into the sea, and it became like the blood of a corpse, and every living thing died that was in the sea. Now, I don't know if this is going to be all over the world or if this is going to be regional, but it won't apply to us because we'll be gone. All right, continuing on to the third bowl. The third angel poured out his bowl into the rivers and the springs of water, and they became blood. So this is all the drinking water now. So not only the seas turned into blood, but now all the drinking water too. Again, I don't know if this is going to be regional or not. Verse 5, and I heard the angel in charge of the waters say, just are you, O Holy One, who is and who was, for you brought these judgments. For they have shed the blood of saints and prophets, and you have given them blood to drink. It is what they deserve. And I heard the altar saying, yes, Lord God the Almighty, true and just are your judgments. The fourth angel poured out his bowl on the sun, and it was allowed to scorch people with fire. They were scorched by the fierce heat, and they cursed the name of God who had power over these plagues. They did not repent and give him glory. The fifth angel poured out his bowl on the throne of the beast, and its kingdom was plunged into darkness. People gnawed their tongues in anguish and cursed the God of heaven for their pain and sores. They did not repent of their deeds. So, again, I don't know if this is regional because it does say darkness is poured out on the beast and his kingdom. However, this we also know from Matthew 24, as well as what we've already studied in Revelation, that there is a time when the sun goes dark, the moon goes dark, the stars fall out of the sky. Okay, so I don't know. It seems like this is probably that moment. That's what I would assume. Is everything's plunged into darkness. The sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up to prepare the way for the kings from the east. Let me pause there real quick. One, this is not saying that the only time that the river Euphrates dries up is in this moment. Okay. I have seen many people post on social media, look, the river Euphrates is drying up. We must be in the end of days. No, that is something that naturally happens, that naturally occurs. Okay. Also, it has to be done in order. So right now, if the river Euphrates were to dry up, we'll look around. Do we see people who've taken a mark of a beast? Have we seen them take on these sores? Have we seen the sea turn to blood? Have we seen all the drinking water turn to blood? Have we seen the sun scorch them? Have we seen the sun go dark? No? Okay, then. So it's like all these things have to happen first. Just because the river Euphrates dries up doesn't mean we're in this moment, okay? And also, when it says to prepare the way for the kings from the east, we'll talk about that next time in Armageddon because that's what they're doing. Okay. The kings from the east are going to come and they're going to join them to prepare for the battle of Armageddon. So, picking up in verse 13, and I saw coming out of the mouth of the dragon and out of the mouth of the beast, that's the Antichrist, and out of the mouth of the false prophet, three unclean spirits like frogs, for they are demonic spirits, performing signs, who go abroad to the kings of the whole world to assemble them for battle on the great day of God the Almighty. Okay, so this is them calling all the kings of the world together who are loyal to him to join up to assemble. And like I said, that's what we're going to talk about next time, the battle on the great day of the God Almighty. Okay. Now look, in parentheses, there's a separate note that says, behold, I am coming like a thief, right? Remember, for them, it's going to be like that. But blessed is he who stays awake, keeping his garments on, that he may not go about naked and be seen exposed. Okay. So he is warning us that we don't want to be amongst this group. We want to be awake. We want our garments on. We need to be ready to be raptured. Don't be among this group. Okay. That's what that warning is. And then it says, and they assembled them at the place that in Hebrew is called Armageddon. Okay. So we'll go more into that in our next lesson. The seventh angel poured out his bowl into the air, and a loud voice came out of the temple from the throne saying, it is done. And there were flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, and a great earthquake, such as there had never been since man was on the earth. So great was that earthquake. This great city, which I believe is Jerusalem, okay? I know somebody pointed out in the NLT translation it says Babylon. It's the only translation that says that. I think they took a liberty that the Greek does not show because I even went and investigated the Greek and the word Babylon's not there. It literally just says the great city. I think it's talking about Jerusalem, but it may not. And we'll get to Babylon here shortly and what Babylon is. But I think what happens is Jesus comes, and when he puts foot on the Mount of Olives, the city is split into parts. Okay. And we'll get into that next time too. All right. And so God remembered Babylon the Great to make her drain the cup of the wine of the fury of his wrath. So not only are those who worshipped the beast and or took the mark and worshipped the beast, but also whoever this Babylon the Great is, that is being referred to as a her, she also is subject to the winepress. Okay, the winepress of God's wrath. Then it says, every island fled away, and no mountains were to be found, and great hailstones, about 100 pounds each, fell from heaven on people, and they cursed God for the plague of the hail, because the plague was so severe. Now, what I want us to do here is look at the correspondence of everything we've studied so far. And what I have in red is something, it's going to list something that's in all of them. It's in Jesus's account in the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24. It's also going to be a part of the seventh bowl, the seventh trumpet, and the sixth and seventh seals. So on all the accounts, there's lightning, there's rumblings, there's peals of thunder, there's a great earthquake, all of them. So all of these things are culminating to the same moment. Okay. Now, there are some that descriptions that don't show up in all four accounts, but it's not in just one. So, for example, I just read about how there's going to be great hailstones. We saw that before in the description of the seventh trumpet. Okay. I also just read every island fled away, no mountains were to be found. We had previously seen that in the sixth seal. Every mountain and island was removed from its place. Okay. We also know that God's temple in heaven was opened, which we see in the sixth seal, that the sun became like sackcloth, the full moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth, and the sky vanished like a scroll that's being rolled up. Well, Jesus described that saying, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven. Okay, so we're seeing a lot of things happening, and they're all lining up because all of them are describing when Jesus comes. He first raptures the church, but then he continues on. He puts his feet on the Mount of Olives, and he deals with the beast, the false prophet, and everybody who followed them. Okay, so we're going to see that next time, but I just want to point out all these things we've been studying. There's a repetition for a reason, because they're giving us insight about different events that are happening, but they all lead up to and culminate in this moment. So, what I had previously read in the seventh bowl was that God remembered Babylon the Great, right, in order to make her drink the cup of the wine of the fury of his wrath. So, Babylon the Great. We talked about the false prophet, okay? And the false prophet is going to be a person, but that person is going to look like a lamb, but talk like a dragon. So, they are going to be coming out of the church, okay, capital C church. So they're going to lead many astray, and they're even within the church, right? They're going to lead those to worship the beast. So that is who Babylon the Great is. Babylon the Great is the church. So we have the beast, the Antichrist, that rises up out of the New World Order, those 10 kings, okay? But we also then have the false prophet who rises up from within the church. Okay, so we will see the beast and the beast kingdom judged, and we're going to see the false prophet and the false church judged as well. And remember, everything that Jesus does, the enemy counterfeits. So if Jesus has a bride, Satan has a bride. And if Jesus has a bride that worships him, Satan has a bride that worships him, right? Okay, so Satan is going to counterfeit, is going to emulate, but is also attempting to corrupt and lead as many astray as possible. And that's why we need to understand this stuff so that we're not led astray, and so that we help others not be led astray either. Okay, so what we're going to be reading in chapters 17 and 18 is going to be the judgment of the counterfeit church, the false bride. Okay, next time we will read the judgment of the beast and the beast kingdom within the false prophet. But here, this is, so it's not just It's not just unbelievers who are going to take the mark and worship the image of the beast and be judged. It's also going to be Christians who are led astray. Because if you remember, Jesus warns that he's going to try to lead astray, even if possible, the elect. Okay, so that's why we need to be on guard. So in what I'm going to be reading to you, you're going to see the term Babylon, mystery Babylon. Depending upon your translation, it may say the prostitute or the harlot. Some translations may be even more colorful than that. I tend to refer to it as the harlot, because I think that the meaning of that is a little bit more accurate to what we see taking place. Okay, so what we're talking about is the harlot church, the false bride, the counterfeit church, the compromised church. Okay, so that's who we're talking about. And from this harlot church, counterfeit bride, is going to rise the false prophet who will then partner with the Antichrist. Okay, so let's learn more about the harlot church, because guess what? We don't want to be a part of it. Okay, we want to be a part of the remnant, the true church, the pure bride, the one who's got her white wedding garments on, the one who's been faithful. We don't want to be caught up in this harlot church. We don't want to be led astray by the false prophet. So let's look at what scripture tells us about the false church, the harlot church, so that we can recognize it as it is not only coming into alignment with the beast kingdom, but also preparing the way for the false prophet. Okay, so starting in Revelation 17, then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls, okay, and the reason why I have that underlined is to orient when this is happening. Okay, so the judgment of the harlot church is happening at the same time because the harlot church is part of the group who take the mark of the beast and worship its image. Okay, but he wants to show John something specific about the counterfeit bride. Come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute or harlot, who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality. Remember that spiritual adultery, that's being in bed with Jezebel. So Jezebel would be this. Okay, Jezebel is the spirit behind this. That's the harlot. Okay, so back in the letter to the church of Thyatira, where Jesus was saying, you're in bed with Jezebel. Well, that's this. Okay, they're in bed, right? They're committing sexual immorality with this harlot, with this counterfeit. Okay, so I'm just trying to connect everything together. So the kings of the earth, the governments, okay, they're in bed with her. And the wine of whose sexual immorality the dwellers on earth have become drunk. Okay, so that's all who basically follow her, who drink the Kool-Aid. Okay, we can put it that way, right? All the dwellers on the earth who drank the Kool-Aid, who are being led astray by the harlot. Okay, and this angel carried John away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. So, what that's telling us is that the harlot church rides in on the beast government. Okay, so remember all the way back to the beginning of our study in Daniel 2 that we are going to see the feet and the 10 toes that is a mixture of iron and clay. Okay, iron being the government, clay being the church. Okay, and the beast that you saw was and is not and is about to rise from the bottomless pit and go to destruction. And the dwellers on earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, will marvel to see the beast, because it was and is not and is to come. So you can see I jumped forward because I just want to remind us about the beast and the beast kingdom before we then go back and focus more on understanding who the harlot is, who Mystery Babylon is, who the counterfeit bride is. Okay, so just to remind us that she's going to be in relationship, she's going to be working with the beast and the beast kingdom. Okay, and that's who we're talking about here. So verses 9 through 13 says this about the beast kingdom. This calls for a mind with wisdom. So the 7 heads of the beast, 7 heads, right? 10 horns. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. They are also 7 kings. So the 7 heads have 2 different meanings. One is for her, the harlot church. The other is for the beast kingdom. So we'll get back to what it means for her with the seven mountains when we dive more into detail about her. But I want to focus back on the seven heads being seven kings. Then it says, five of whom have fallen, one is, the other has not yet come. And when he does come, he must remain only a little while. As for the beast that was and is not, it is an eighth, but it belongs to the seven and goes to destruction. Okay. And the 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received royal power, but they are to receive authority as kings for 1 hour together with the beast. These are of one mind and they hand over their power and authority to the beast. Okay, so how do we interpret that? Well, there's two different lenses you can look through. If we consider it from John's time, the five kings or kingdoms that had already been and fallen would have been Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Mede, Persia, and Greece. And the one that is in the time of John would have still been Rome. And then we know that Rome ultimately falls, and the one to come would then be the Holy Roman Empire. All of this is correlating with the Nebuchadnezzar's vision in Daniel 2. Okay. So then the eighth would then be the European Union, the renewal, the revival of the Holy Roman Empire. Okay. Now, that lines up well if you're looking at it from John's timeline. However, I think it's a message for us, and I think it also lines up with our timeline. And this then corresponds with the beasts in Daniel that we have already done a lesson on. So you can go back and learn that in more detail, because ultimately, if you count all the beasts that Daniel sees, amongst them are seven heads. And then we compared that to Daniel 13 as well as to this passage, seven heads. And what we saw that they all represent, okay, would be five basically global empires that have fallen, and that would be the United Kingdom, okay, the lion, Russia, the bear, and the first three Reichs of Germany. And remember, the leopard has four heads. Well, we've already had the first three because Hitler was the third Reich. Well, then the fourth head of the leopard would be the European Union. And if you recall, the leopard also had the wings of a fowl, which represents France, and it was the European Union came out of an alliance between Germany and France. So all of that lines up with both Daniel's vision of the beast as well as what we saw previously in Revelation 13. So that would be where we are in our timeline is right now is the one that is the European Union. So therefore the one that is to come is going to be the beast kingdom, the new world order that is the 10 kings, or going back to Nebuchadnezzar's dream of the statue, it's the 10 toes, but also of Daniel's vision of the beast, it's with the 10 horns. And then John's earlier vision, Revelation 13, it's also 10 horns. And all of them consistently, we are told, represent kings. Okay, so I believe that this fits better because it says the 10 kings have not yet received royal power, but when they do, it'll only be for 1 hour, and they're coming into power with the beast. That's the New World Order. Okay. That's going to be the 10 kings or kingdoms or rulers, however it's going to come to power. And it says the eighth that belongs to the seven. Well, that's the Antichrist. And it says that when he does come into power, he will only remain for a little while. Well, we know it's only going to be 3.5 years, and then Jesus comes back and judges him. Okay, so that's who we're talking about. That's the beast kingdom, and that is who the harlot is coordinating with and working with. So then who is the harlot church? Okay. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The seven heads are seven mountains on which the woman is seated. So like I said, when it comes to the beast kingdom, the seven heads are seven kings. But when it comes to the harlot church, this is now seven mountains on which the woman is seated. Okay. Well, what does that correspond to? It corresponds to Rome. Rome is known as the city of seven hills. Okay, you can look that up. You can see the reference I have screenshotted there. It says Encyclopedia Britannica as well as Wikipedia, but I also have a map that shows you the seven hills that make up Rome, okay, especially ancient Rome, traditional Rome. and that's what I believe are the seven mountains upon which she is seated. I also believe, and we'll get to it later, it could secondarily also represent the seven mountains of influence, because we also see that there's something that's influencing all those too. But right now, when it comes to what is she seated on, she is seated on Rome. She is seated on these seven hills. Okay. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her sexual immorality. Well, who's that? I believe that's the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church. Because when you see here, this was the latest pope who, this was the ceremony that brought him into power. And you can see it is full of purple and scarlet, which those are the colors that are worn by bishops and cardinals. We also see them arrayed with different kinds of jewels around their necks, on their fingers, as well as other kind of ornamentation. We see the golden hat. Okay, so I believe that is signifying or also pointing to it being the Roman Catholic Church. On her forehead was written a name of mystery: Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes or harlots and of earth's abominations. Well, this next graphic is something I put together that corresponds to just church history, because the word Catholic ultimately means just universal. So when we talk about the capital C church, the wholeness of Christendom, okay, that's how it started when it was the apostles, right? It was just one church. We weren't broken up into different denominations. But in 1054 was the Great Schism, and the Great Schism was geographic between East and West. So on the East Church was the Eastern Orthodox Church, and the Western Church became the Roman Catholic Church. And that's who I believe is the primary church that makes up the Harlot Church. And I believe that the false prophet is going to be the Pope. Well, if you look from the Roman Catholic Church, all these different churches, all these different groups, all these different denominations that were birthed out of her, right? Mother of prostitutes, okay? Now, am I calling all these churches and all these groups prostitutes or harlots? No, I am not. However, we know that within each denomination, within each unique congregation, there is an opportunity for some or all to be led astray, to get in bed with Jezebel, to be led by a false teacher or a false prophet. We know that's possible. And in fact, some of these denominations have had further splits because of different positions on doctrinal issues, right? We recently saw a split amongst the Methodists, where one group continued on a path of basically not calling sin sin, okay, and supporting things that the Bible adamantly opposes. So you had a group, a remnant that had to break away in order to continue to be in line with Scripture. We saw the same thing happen with the Anglican / Episcopalians. Okay, they also had a similar split. And we're continuing to see that happen within these different denominations. Is we are seeing the harlot there. We are seeing Jezebel in there, bringing division, bringing spiritual adultery, bringing false worship and false teachings and witchcraft and all these different things. Okay, so not all of them are going to be a part of the Harlot Church. However, when it says she's the mother of prostitutes, that means it's not just her, it's also her and offspring. And we have a lot of churches that branched off of or respond out of the Roman Catholic Church. All right, I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. All right, so I'm going to show you a screen and that is going to talk about all the people, including Christians, that the Roman Catholic Church historically killed. But we also know that the false prophet is going to help with further martyring dissidents who refuse to take the mark of the beast and worship the beast, They're going to make up the great multitude. They're going to be the ones who are coming out of the great tribulation, martyred for their faith, because as we learned in our previous lesson, there's going to be some mechanism by which we're monitored, and if we don't worship the beast, that we can be slain. Okay, so it's both. I'm going to show you the historical, but just know that by the time Jesus comes back, there's also going to be even more blood of saints, blood of martyrs of Jesus on the hands of the Harlot Church. And like I said, it's not exclusively the Roman Catholic Church. I just think the Roman Catholic Church is going to lead the charge and make up a lot of the Harlot Church, and that specifically the false prophet is going to be the Pope coming out of the Roman Catholic Church. However, the Harlot Church is going to encompass all people who claim to follow Jesus and yet are in bed with Jezebel and worship the beast and, compromise on their doctrine and practice witchcraft and all of those sorts of things we've already talked about. So in the center, you're about to watch a video I took recording my phone as I scrolled through the Wikipedia entry of people who've been killed by the Roman Catholic Church. It's going to start out with pictures, paintings, and then it's going to go into a list. It's not exhaustive because clearly they've killed more people that weren't known by name that aren't going to be listed here, including the very first thing it says, the burning of the Templars. We don't know the names of all the Templars. We don't even know fully how many were killed in that incident. But I just want you to see as I scroll through this entry on Wikipedia, the ones that are listed here. And as you watch that scroll through, I also want to read through some of these quotes that I found about, again, the historic kind of head count of who've been killed by the Catholic Church. In 1871, in the history of Romanism, it says from the birth of the popery, we would call that the papacy now, in 606 to the present time, it is estimated by careful and credible historians that more than 50 millions of the human family have been slaughtered for the crime of heresy by popish persecutors, an average of more than 40,000 religious murders for every year of the existence of the popery or the papacy. Okay. In a history of the Church of God, it says the Catholic Crusades, the Albigenses, I don't know if I'm saying that right, in southern France from 1209 to 1229 under Popes Innocent III, Honorius III, and Gregory IX was one of the bloodiest tragedies in human history. The number of Albigenses that perished in the 20 Years' War is estimated from 1 to 2 million. And then we have the history of the rise and influence of the spirit of rationalism in Europe from 1910 that says the Roman Church, or the Church of Rome, sorry, has shed more innocent blood than any other institution that has ever existed among mankind. Will be questioned by no Protestant who has a competent knowledge of history. The memorials, indeed, of many of her persecutions are now so scanty that it is impossible to form a complete conception of the multitude of her victims, and it is quite certain that no power of imagination can adequately realize their sufferings. And the last quote comes from 1836. Popery, papacy, an enemy to civil and religious liberty, says, in one word, the Church of Rome has spent immense treasures and shed in murder the blood of 68,500,000 of the human race to establish before the astonished and disgusted world her fixed determination to annihilate every claim set up by the human family to liberty and the right of unbounded freedom of conscience. So that number, that 68 millions, which they're estimating back in 1836, almost 200 years ago, that would include everybody. But as we've seen in 1871, when it was talking about 50 millions, it says for the crime of heresy, and they called them religious murders. So the percentage, or one, the number that still exists, or the number that's still the number that would be true today, I don't know what that would be. But we also don't know exactly what percentage would be Christians. However, there's been atrocities throughout the millennia, right? So I'm just pointing that out because again, we're trying to piece together the different descriptions that John is seeing in this vision so that we can see who is the harlot church. Okay. All right, so let's go back and let's see what else we got. All right, so far we have, she sits on seven mountains or hills, which is Rome. She wears purple and gold, purple and red with gold and jewels. That's bishops and cardinals. She has spawned other harlot churches. She has and will kill the saints of Jesus. What else do we know? Well, back in verse 2, I had already read, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute seated on many waters." Or down in verse 15, the angel explains that the waters that you saw where the prostitute is seated are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages. Well, here is a picture that shows the percentage of the population in any particular country around the world that identifies as Catholic. The latest number that I heard is 1.6 billion worldwide would identify as Catholic, with a lot of Central and South America, but also still a lot of Europe, and certain places, in Africa. And so you can kind of see, like the Philippines, I know is very Catholic. So there's a lot of places, but this fits the description, right? We see Catholics that are around the world, different peoples, different nations, different languages. Finally, the woman that you saw is the great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth. Well, what is that? Well, Vatican City, and as you can see, Vatican City sits in the middle of Rome. You got Rome on all sides, and on the left, I just have like a map. Well, what we're looking at on the right, that would be St. Peter's Square, and that would be the road leading away from it. And at the bottom of the picture, okay, where you kind of see these statues of figures, that would be St. Peter's Basilica, and then St. Peter's Square is that circular shape, and then that road leading out would be on our map, the road leading east out of Vatican City. But that, I believe, is the city. Okay, she is a city. So Babylon is a city, the Harlot Church. Okay, and so it's a city. It's a city within a city, because Rome is the seven hills that she also sits on. All the many people groups around the world, that's the many waters she sits on. She rides in on the back of the political system, the beast system. Okay, so the Catholic Church is the main harlot church. The false prophet is the Pope. However, she's the mother of harlots. So the counterfeit bride includes all who commit spiritual adultery, meaning all who are in bed with Jezebel, all who worship the beast. Okay? So no matter what church you are attending, you need to be praying for guidance from the Holy Spirit, because the harlot is targeting all the churches. The harlot is trying to infiltrate all the churches, because that's its whole goal, its whole purpose is to lead astray even the elect, to deceive, to draw us into that great delusion so that we do take the mark and eternally damn ourselves. Okay? That's the ultimate purpose. So we need to remain awake. We need to remain ready. We need to keep our wedding garments on. We need to be a part of that remnant that does not fall for it, that does not be led astray, that does not get in bed with Jezebel. Remember the letter to the church of Thyatira. There was a lot of them who were in bed with Jezebel that Jesus was criticizing, but he also then commended the remnant who weren't in bed with Jezebel. Make sure you're a part of that remnant, but also, if at all possible, make sure that you're praying for your church, and that your church as a whole, whatever church it is, does not get in bed with Jezebel. And if you discern that maybe you are at a church where the leadership is in bed with Jezebel, you need to pray about that. The Lord might keep you there to try to bring about conviction, correction, and restoration out of it, or he may call you out of it. So you just need to be awake and ready for yourself, and don't let anybody lead you astray. Now, the harlot church doesn't work alone. So as I mentioned before, her sitting on seven mountains may have layers of meaning, because we also know there's something called the seven mountains of influence, the seven mountains of culture, the seven mountains of society. There is an evangelistic tool called the Seven Mountain Mandate, and they use these seven mountains of influence or seven mountains of culture in order to prepare missionaries and outreach, in order to go into these places and try to bring Jesus into all areas of influence. Okay. But what I want us to do now as we go into Revelation 18, because she doesn't work alone, we are going to see that the ones she works with aligns with the seven mountains of influence. All right. Because she's one of them. She would be religion. But let's watch what else is said about her in Revelation 18, because I think Revelation 18 kind of backs us up and zooms out a bit. And here's why I say that. It starts out with, after this, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was made bright with his glory. And he called out with a mighty voice, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place for demons, a haunt for every unclean spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, a haunt for every unclean and detestable beast. For all nations have drunk the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have grown rich from the power of her luxurious living. Now, this phrase, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, we heard already back in Revelation 14:8. Revelation 14:8 is when the angels are putting out word trying to warn people. Okay, so the bowls of wrath have not yet been poured out. Babylon, Mystery Babylon, the harlot, has not yet been subjected to judgment. So that's why I think it's kind of backing up a little bit and pointing to the warnings that are going to be given, because we saw back in Revelation 14:8, again, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She who made all nations drink the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality. Okay, so this is a warning. Then I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, lest you take part in her sins, lest you share in her plagues. See, the plagues haven't come yet. For her sins are heaped high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. So, continuing on in the warnings that we see in Revelation 14, another angel, a third, followed them, saying with a loud voice, If anyone worships the beast in its image and receives a mark on his forehead or on his hand, he also will drink the wine of God's wrath, poured full strength in the cup of his anger. He'll be tormented. Right? We already read that. Okay. But that again, the plagues have not yet come. So, again, there's going to be a moment where God is calling his bride out of her, the harlot church. He is calling the remnant, the true bride, the pure bride, the virginal bride, okay, out of her. Come out of her, my people, lest you take part in her sins, lest you share in her plagues. Okay. Pay her back as she herself has paid back others, and repay her double for her deeds. Mix a double portion for her in the cup she mixed. As she glorified herself and lived in luxury, so give her a like measure of torment and mourning, since in her heart she says, I sit as a queen, I am no widow, and mourning I shall never see. For this reason, her plagues will come in a single day. Remember, I told you there was going to be something I showed you where it looks like it all happens in a day. Death and mourning and famine, and she'll be burned up with fire, for mighty is the Lord God who has judged her. Okay. But again, she's not working alone. It's going to be all people, not just those who are part of the Harlot Church, but anybody who takes the mark of the beast and worships its image, including those who don't simultaneously claim to be Christian. Okay. So the first thing we see, and it had already been mentioned, but it was the kings of the earth. Who does that represent? Governments and nations. Government is a second mountain. So now we have religion, the harlot, and the kings, the government. And it says in verses 9 and 10 of Revelation 18, And the kings of the earth who committed sexual immorality and lived in luxury with her will weep and wail over her when they see the smoke of her burning. They will stand far off in fear of her torment. Why? Because that torment's coming for them too. Alas, alas, you great city, you mighty city Babylon, for in a single hour your judgment has come. So I don't think all the plagues come in a single hour. I think that each of these is talking about plagues, and maybe each plague comes on at a different hour and it all happens in a day. I'm not sure. We won't be here anyway. So again, this isn't for us, but it is for us to understand so that we can be aware of why it's so important to witness to people, bring them into salvation with the Lord, but also to wake up those who think they know, who are currently vulnerable to being led astray. So we got double duty. Okay. We need to save the lost, but we also need to wake up the sleeping. Okay. Here's another mountain, the merchants of the earth. That would be corporations, business, and that includes legal and illegal business, as you're about to see. in verses 11 through 14. And the merchants of the earth weep and mourn for her, since no one buys their cargo anymore. Cargo of gold, silver, jewels, pearls, fine linen, purple cloth, silk, scarlet cloth, all kinds of scented wood, all kinds of articles of ivory, which we know would be illegal, all kinds of articles of costly wood, bronze, iron, marble, cinnamon, spice, incense, myrrh, frankincense, wine, oil, fine flour, wheat, cattle, and sheep, horses, and chariots, and slaves. That is human souls. We would call that human trafficking, right? So, like I said, this mountain, it's not just the legal businesses, it's the illegal businesses too. And says, the fruit for which your soul longed has gone from you, and all your delicacies and your splendors are lost to you, never to be found again. And it goes on to say, the merchants of these wares who gained wealth from the harlot church will stand far off in fear of her torment. Why? Because again, it's coming for them too. Weeping and mourning aloud, alas, alas, for the great city that was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet, adorned with gold, with jewels and with pearls. For in a single hour, all this wealth has been laid waste. So that's why I think that the single hour, it might be specific things happening, but it's all transpiring over the course of a day. All right, who else do we got? We got shipmasters, seafaring men, sailors, those whose trade is on the sea. Okay. It says, so that it lists all them. They stand far off and they cry out as they see the smoke of Babylon's burning. What city was like the great city? So who is this, right? So we have kings. Okay, that's government. We have merchants. Okay, that's business. But what shipmasters, seafaring men, sailors, right? First, this refers to those who carry the cargo and deliver the goods of the merchants, as well as those who trade on the sea, which would be waves that today could include the internet, right? We surf the internet, or it could be the airwaves, such as we see media and entertainment. It's also a reference to the Chaldeans, who were considered the intelligentsia. Okay, they were the sailors, but they were also the educated. If you remember back in studying Daniel, that when Daniel and his three companions were taken and they were going to be trained to serve Nebuchadnezzar, they had to be trained specifically by the Chaldeans because they were the intelligentsia. So who does that include today? I believe it considers anybody who thinks that they're educated and elite and just better than all us. So that could be academics, but just any kind of information gatekeeper. Just think about those, whether it's social media, right? The Jeff Bezoses and the Zuckerbergs and the Elon Musks, right? Think about that. Could they fall under corporations? Sure. But I also think that they could fall here too, because I think that those who carry the water for the merchants, for the corporations, for the government too. But those whose trade is on the sea, those who disseminate the information, those who think that they're so elite and better than us and know better, right? So I think this represents three additional mountains, which would be media, arts and entertainment, as well as the education system. So think about it. Who's missing? Family. The mountain of family is the only one not specifically addressed in this warning. And I think it's because the family is the ultimate target for all the other ones. That the harlot and ultimately the dragon, right? Satan himself, he's coming after us and he's coming after our kids. And he comes at us through media, through business, through arts and entertainment, through religion, through government, and through the education system. Remember Nimrod building a city and a tower. We've been living through iterations of the spirit of Nimrod, the Antichrist, rising and attempting to build a city, government system, and a tower, a religious system, and God has been stopping all previous efforts because it was not yet time for the final iteration, which I believe very strongly we are probably living in now. The influence that permeates all aspects of society, all the mountains of culture, it is the dominant secular worldview known as humanism. Satan continues to make the same offer today that he first made to Eve in the Garden of Eden, and he actually also made when he tempted Jesus too. You can become like God. All you got to do is agree with me. So what I want to point out is that we are living through a battle of worldviews. We have the true biblical worldview that says Perfect God made perfect man and placed him in a perfect world with responsibilities and boundaries. The devil came in serpentine form and posed questions that led Eve to doubt the goodness of God and to choose to defy him in an attempt to become like him. This introduced sin into the world and into human nature. Now, humans are imperfect and possess a sinful nature in which selfishness and rebellion rule the heart. They still strive to be their own God. Without salvation and redemption through Jesus Christ, there is no way to overcome this fallen state or its consequences. That's not what the world is selling. That is not the worldview that they are trying to lead people to embrace. Instead, it's this humanistic worldview where a mean God enslaved mankind, restricting his ability to develop his own inner divine self and become a God because guess what? Yahweh was afraid that we would surpass him. The devil is a savior. Okay, you've been looking at it all wrong. The devil's actually a savior who told Eve the truth and showed her how to free herself from mean God's restrictions. This opened the door for all mankind to fully manifest their potential because man is inherently good. Man only acts in selfish ways when shackled by restrictions placed upon him by imperfect systems. Systems that today are racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic. So rebelling against these systems is virtuous and the way to true freedom. I know for those of us who ascribe to a biblical worldview, what I just read is absolutely abhorrent and disgusting. But take a step back, and isn't that exactly what we see going on around us? On the news, open up social media. What's being sold out there? Even go to certain churches. What is being sold from the pulpit in some of these churches? Go to certain businesses at certain times a year, especially. What are they selling us? It's this humanistic worldview. And it has permeated and now dominates media, right? Think about it. Both traditional media and social media. It dominates that. That's why people, when they have certain YouTube, like on YouTube, have to talk in code, okay? Or you can't post certain things or you'll be canceled or restricted. Okay. If you turn on the news, a lot of times you'll see them parroting all the same things. It's actually quite creepy to watch the compilation videos where all these different broadcasters in these different parts of the country are all saying the exact same thing. Or if it's real creepy when you see the same kind of words showing up very oddly in headlines because they're all coordinating together. Okay. The humanistic worldview dominates media. It dominates most business, right? The corporate world. It used to be different, but now the corporate world is quite Marxist. Okay, that's what we see. A humanistic worldview is what undergirds a Marxist worldview, a socialist, a communist worldview. Okay, so whether you want to call it Marxism, socialism, communism, wokeism, radical liberalism, it's all this. It's the same worldview. Okay. It now dominates arts and entertainment. Try go on watching a movie with your kids. Oh my goodness. Like it's hard to find anything decent to watch that doesn't have this type of propaganda shoved in it. Churches, like I said, we are seeing church after church after church fall and be infiltrated by this worldview. The government, I mean, man, there are times where it's hard to tell the difference between the right and the left. It just seems like they're two wings on the same bird because ultimately all they want is power and control. Okay. And how many times are they like bending the knee and they're compromising, and even if they come for your vote and they tell you one thing and it sounds biblical and it sounds like they're going to uphold Christian values, and then they go off to Washington or they go off to the state capitol and they get behind closed doors and they make these deals and then they come out and they have all these excuses, right? I mean, it's just, we've all lived it. It's very hard to find a politician who stays true to biblical values because the government as a whole, there really isn't a whole lot of difference between who's in charge, because it ultimately is still all pushing a humanistic worldview. The education system, oh my goodness, a lot of the public school system now is it's not worth sending your kids to, because it's an indoctrination camp for this type of worldview, this type of thinking. Sending your kids to university anymore, I got pushed out of academia because I was too Christian and too conservative. Like there was no way that I could function there, that I could survive there. And while they didn't come straight out like and ostracize and make my job more difficult, the fact that I stood to truth, I stood to principles, and I wouldn't back down, I mean, it made me very unpopular amongst the administration, because that's not what they want, right? They want a Marxist education system, they want a humanistic worldview, right? It's sad and it's scary how many kids get sent off to college and they come back atheists and Marxists. Okay. So whether you're worried about your kids in elementary school, middle school, high school, or college, you're rightfully concerned. Okay. And that's why I know there's been this resurgence of homeschooling, okay, and a resurgence of private schooling because of this, because we recognize it very much so in that mountain. We recognize it in entertainment, we recognize it in media, right? But it's actually all of those, because what are they all ultimately trying to get to? The family. They're trying to get to you, they're trying to get to your kids. Okay. Okay. So I'll take a breath, because I know that that can really get us all riled up. But I am just trying to bring it all together for you. Okay. What are we up against? What is coming down the pipe? Okay. The good news, we're not part of the Harlot Church. We will not take the mark of the beast. We will not worship the beast. We may end up being martyred for it, or we may end up alive when Jesus comes back and we get raptured and caught up into the air with him. Either way, if we stay true, we endure to the end, we are saved. That's what Jesus said. Those who endure to the end will be saved. Those who are with him are called and chosen and faithful. We will not be subject to God's wrath. We will be raptured first. But those who are left behind, those who are subject to the winepress of God's wrath, all who take the mark and worship the beast's image, whether they're part of the Harlot Church or not, what they have waiting for them are the initial 6 bowls of wrath that lead up to the final bowl, which corresponds to the final seal, the final trumpet. And we know that in the midst of that, the counterfeit church, the harlot church, mystery Babylon, the counterfeit bride, is also going to be judged and destroyed. We know that the beast, and we'll get into more detail about this in our next lesson, the beast is going to be destroyed with fire. And if you recall, previous verses that we studied even said, killed with the breath of Jesus's mouth. I think that's the sword coming out of his mouth, right? So when Jesus comes, it's not actually going to be much of a battle, because he's going to speak, right? Rhema, the spoken word, the breath of his mouth, that's the sword in his mouth. That's what's going to ultimately kill the beast. So we know both the false prophet and the harlot church, which produced him, is going to be judged, and that's going to be the winepress of the fury of God, the wrath of God. We also know that the beast and the beast kingdom is also going to be destroyed. And all of that happens at what we tend to call Armageddon. And I'll explain more about what that actually means and what it's going to look like and all of that in our next lesson. Okay. So, again, I know that this particular lesson can feel really heavy. So remember, take heart, we are not here for it, okay? However, we need to learn from it, because we need to hold on to how imperative it is that we stay true. We stay awake, we stay ready, we stay pure, we stay true to the Lord, even in the face of intense persecution, being ostracized, being kicked out of our homes, like we cut off from our financial system. I would rather starve for Christ than take the mark of the beast and damn myself to hell and be subject to God's wrath. Um, I want to be in that first reaping, not the second reaping. I want to be that true bride. I want to be that remnant that when Jesus comes back, right? I get called up, caught up to him in the air. Okay. And I pray that for you too. So again, for us, Jesus coming back is exciting. It is good news. Okay. We need to hold on to that. But we also need to hold on to that in the midst of times getting hard. And we need to hold on to that as a motivation to keep spreading the gospel, both to those who don't know it yet, who aren't saved, but also to those who think they are saved, but they're naive, they're ignorant, they're asleep. They're in the Harlot Church. They haven't yet taken the mark, they haven't yet bent the knee, but they're vulnerable to it because they don't understand, because they're asleep, because they're ignorant, because they don't know better. So while we can be excited, we can also be sad and be concerned for all of those who aren't yet saved, who are going to be subject to God's wrath when Jesus comes back. But don't let that paralyze us. Let that instead motivate us so that we can, like I said at the very beginning, the church is the final arc. Let's get everybody on board because it is at the rapture that God closes the door, because now we're removed from all of this. And that's when disaster comes. All the bowls of wrath are going to come. They're going to be overwhelmed and flooded with God's judgment. So let's one, remain encouraged. Let's stay focused on Jesus. Let's stay awake. Let's stay ready. Let's have our wedding garments on, the righteous deeds of the saints, and let's continue to be on mission, speaking truth, reviving the church. That's what revival really means, is to wake up, as well as spread the gospel to those who don't know Jesus yet. Whew, it was a lot, I know, but we only have 2 more lessons, and I hope you stick with me because there's a lot that we need to understand about Armageddon, even though we won't be subject to it either. The question is, will we be here for it? I know that's a bit of a teaser, but it's something I want to work through with you next time. So I hope you join me then.